Hello, my name is Amy Galpin, and I'm the Chief Curator of the Patricia and Philip Frost Art Museum at Florida International University. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to our program, Artist as Researcher, Visualizing Knowledge in the Americas. This program is held in conjunction with our current exhibition, Accumulate, Classify, Preserve, Display, Roberto Obregon Archive from the Carolina and Fernando Echeverri collection. I want to extend my gratitude to Carolina and Fernando Echeverri for their incredible generosity and for their commitment to ensuring the legacy of Roberto Obregon. The Obregon exhibition originated at the University Galleries of the University of Florida, Gainesville, and was curated by Jesus Fuenmayor, Program Director and Visiting Curator, and Dr. Kyra M. Cabañas, a Professor of Art History, School of Art and Art History at the University of Florida. Tonight, Kyra Cabañas will serve as the moderator of the program. Dr. Cabañas is a rigorous scholar with a lengthy publication record, including Learning from Madness, Brazilian Modernism in Global Contemporary Art from the University of Chicago Press, and the forthcoming Immanent Vitalities, Meaning and Materiality in Modern and Contemporary Art from the University of California Press. Please join me in welcoming Kyra Cabañas.
Hi, thank you, Amy, for your introduction. So for those of you just joining us, tonight's panel, Artist as Researcher, Visualizing Knowledge in the Americas, is presented in conjunction with the exhibition currently held at FIU's Frost Museum, Accumulate, Classify, Preserve, Display, Roberto Obregon Archive from the Carolina and Fernando Echeverri collection. Before introducing the speakers, I'd like to just take a moment to pause and celebrate. Today is 1 year since UF went online in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. And I wanted to read just very quickly 2 lines that I wrote in relation to one of Roberto Obregon's works called Rosa Enferma, which I wrote just around this time last year. So at that moment, I wrote, Obregon's Rosa Enferma, or Sick Rose, repeatedly reminds me of our common corporeality, how we daily negotiate our bodily vulnerability. In the face of the pandemic, we are tasked with rethinking modes of relationality, how caring for oneself is, somewhat paradoxically, to care beyond oneself for community. Rosa Enferma speaks to our shared vulnerability and how it enables care and love. We reach out to family and community, even former friends and ex-lovers, in a way that is possibly sentimental and in tension with Obregon's allegorical understanding of this work. So I'd like to take a moment just to thank everybody present for the care they've taken for themselves and their community in these times, and also through your very presence, the care you've given to art and for the thought and reflection that art makes possible. So with that, I'd also like to thank Georgiana Pomeroy, the Frost director, and also Amy Galpin, chief curator at the Frost, for enabling this exhibition to happen there and to travel from the University of Florida to FIU's Frost Museum. And of course, I'd like to thank the IT team that's with us today, as well as Carmen Carpio, Oscar, and Wesley, who are here making sure that the event this evening goes seamlessly on this platform. So tonight's speakers are each going to address the interconnections between aesthetic form and artistic research, as well as the modes of display and types of knowledge art produces, taking the concept of artist as researcher as their point of departure. In terms of format, I'll proceed by introducing each individual speaker, and at the end, we'll have a conversation amongst myself and the panelists, and then open it to questions from the chat. So with that, I'll introduce this evening's first speaker, Jesus Fuenmayor, who is a curator with more than 30 years experience in the field and is currently program director and visiting curator at University Galleries, University of Florida, where he curated this exhibition of Roberto Obregon, the first public art institution exhibition of the late Venezuelan artist's work. In 2008, he was curator for the 14th Cuenca Biennial, And in 2015, he curated the exhibitions Eugenio Espinosa, Unruly Supports at the Pettis Art Museum in Miami, and also Autobiography of a Lying Gego at the Dominique Levy Gallery in New York. For those of you joining us from Miami, you might remember his work as director and chief curator of the Cisneros Fontanel's art collection and foundation from 2012 to 2015. And prior to that, he was director and chief curator of Periférico Caracas in Venezuela. He's also curated multiple exhibitions of contemporary artists and also contributed to various museum publications and contemporary periodicals. So the title of his talk this evening is The Obregon Method. So please join me in a virtual round of applause to welcome Jesus Fuenmayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaira, for your kind words and introduction. I think you have been getting into work in a way that you really get into the side of his emotional message, which is, I think, is very important. As Karia said, I'm going to introduce the exhibition. Here's wait a sec, I'm going to share my screen. And I also want to thank Jordana Pomeroy and Amy Galpin for their support and for the invitation to present this exhibition at the Frost Museum. And of course, I want to thank the collectors, Carolina and Fernando Severri, for making this exhibition possible. From the outset, it is important to make a distinction. This is an exhibition about the Roberto Bregon archive, not a retrospective of his work. Our goal and point of departure for this exhibition are completely different from a retrospective. We are dealing with the artist's legacy. That is, everything, every single object that was in his house when he died on October 27, 2003. The type of materials that we have to consider include the artist's personal library, which we are seeing one of the images of the way they keep it at the Archivo Roberto Bregon in Caracas. That is composed of more than 300 volumes. Some other books on Obregon's library, including books on William Blake, Marcel Duchamp, and Botticelli. Personal documents and works by artists. Like in this case, it's a copy that Obregon did himself of Botticelli's illustration for the Divine Comedy. This is a very personal object for Obregon. Is the autograph that Marilyn Monroe dedicated to him, to Roberto Bregon. Best wishes, Marilyn Monroe. Is being used here as part of a collage that Roberto was planning to do. But also in his collection, he has magazine, postcards, in his legacy, I mean, videos, transparencies, newspaper clippings, and everything else that you may find in anybody's personal belonging, in addition to hundreds of his own works and documents related to them. That is what Fernando Severri and Carolina Severri decided to acquire in 2011, and what they converted into what we now call Archivo Roberto Bregon. But who is Roberto Bregon, and why do we need to look at his legacy? In Venezuela, where he developed most of his career, and in Latin America in general, Obregon is more of a cult figure than a consecrated master. known by curators, artists, and collectors. Even though is relatively unknown by large audiences, if you want to study the relevance of Latin American art, what is called global conceptualist practices, Obregon should be one of the names that needs to be revisited. His experiments from the early 70s and 80s anticipated many of the post-conceptualist strategies that has been widely in use since then. The affiliation of Obregon to post-conceptualist practices might be justified on account of his neglect to master narrative, like the dichotomy between abstraction and figuration, and his concomitant need to privilege minor stories associated with his very localized micropolitics. And we are seeing in this image, one of Obregon's collaborators was a kid that was collaborating with him in the production of a work that is titled, it's a series of work that was titled The Water as a Cycle. Obregon work can also be associated with global conceptualism because of his appropriation of a scientific language, botanical science in his case, with which to renew his own language. Here, for example, we're seeing a botanical illustration of Rosa Canina, Canina Rose, that at the bottom has Roberto Bregon's name in Gothic font, which Roberto Bregon considered like his trademark or a kind of logo. His systematic use of an apparently transparent operation that leaves the process naked and makes the process the center of the work, his dissection of the rose, is also among characteristic, other characteristic components of the second avant-garde movement. Here we're going to see a sample of Roberto Bregon's dissections when he separated the petals and organized them in a page. So it's also a characteristic of this type of practice that we're talking about, the use of photography, the documentary, the homologation of text and image, and the use of circuits that are parallel to the prevailing art system, as in the case of mail art. So here we have an example of the Obregon's use of photography. Is an early work from 1975. It's what he called chronicle. It's a chronicle where he registered the decay of the rose. Then we have a document. It's a list of documents that is part of a work. So that tells you how much he appreciated the value of the document in his work. In this case, this image is the word rose written in Arabic, in the sense that he was able to collapse here image and text. As in this series of work from the 1970s, one is from 1975. It was a letter that he would send to his friends with instructions of how to make a paper rose. So again, it was the work was an instruction that he sent to his friends. So in spite of that, in spite of all of this relationship of Obregon's work to these international conceptualist practices, his description in this larger history of contemporary art practices is not the focus of the exhibition. Our main problem is to take advantage of the materials found in the Obregon archive to understand the process of his work, because we think that we can learn a lot from it and how this understanding could change the way we approach to any artist's work in general. I think it is important to take in consideration that Obregon was a very peculiar type of artist. And even for curators like me that were acquainted with the work of other artists of his generation, his work remained somehow obscure. In the beginning of his career, at the end of the 1960s, Obregon was considered l'enfant terrible at the same time that kinetic art and new figuration in Venezuela were the most dominant trends. We're talking about around 1968. Obregon 15 minutes of fame were over very fast, and due to what he considered a systematic misunderstanding of his work, he decided to stop painting. In the 1970s and the 1980s, he held only 3 exhibitions, solo exhibitions, and none of them in major venues. Nevertheless, this long period was perhaps the most fruitful of his career, both intellectually and creatively. Over these years, he invented practically the entire repertoire of for which he's now recognized. In part, it was his resistance to exhibit and his hermetic character that impelled me to keep digging into his work. Before his death, I was involved in showing his work a few times, but it was only upon his death in 2003 when his close friend and Venezuela-based Austrian artist, Alfred Benemoser, approached me to propose a series of events as a homage to Obregon that I became more familiar with his work. This series of events that Benemoser titled Con Obregon, with Obregon, were supposed to be presented every year and to be held on St. Valentine's Day as a tribute to friendship. For the first one in 2006, Benemoser presented an exhibition in the space of the private foundation that I was running by then, Periférico Caracas Arte Contemporáneo. Is the image that we're looking here is an installation shot of that exhibition. The exhibition consisted in works that were gifts to the artist's friends, from Roberto Bregon to his friends. To my surprise, we were able to collect and exhibit around 120 works. And we can see in this image that the way that the exhibition was done was with the help of Obregon's friends. In the image of the left, on the left, we see Alfred Benemoser de-installing one of the works, and on the image on the right is curator Taller Rivero, who was also de-installing one of the works. So for me, this exhibition was a major inspiration to organize the presentation of the Obregon archive. The idea that there was no curatorial frame other than all the works being a gift from Obregon was very appealing because the curatorial intervention was almost invisible. This precedent took me to the awkward, not to say crazy idea that we should display the archive in its entirety. It's an archive that is composed of more than 2,000 items. Despite the of the idea, this fantasy was a trigger that led us to a suitable curatorial solution adapted to the circumstances of this particular moment. A discovery made by Israel Ortega and Leonor Solá, who are in charge of inventorying and registering Obregon's legacy, made us think that Obregon, fictional encyclopedism, so Borgiano, so Borgian, and typical of his work, could be translated into an exhibition format. More than 5 years ago, Ortega and Solá discovered that of the hundreds of works by Obregon, that Obregon made from 1974 until the date of his death that were related to the rose petal, the insignia of his artistic production, the vast majority of them came from a minimal set of real roses. This discovery was for us the perfect excuse to believe that the illusion of a totality that runs through any archive could be faithfully and with a certain degree of credibility transferred to an exhibition. From 2015 up until the first iteration of the archive exhibition at the University Gallery in 2019, Ortega and Solá were able to identify more than 300 works and documents that correspond to 18 different roses. Some of the roses, like Agua de Mar, seawater rose, has as many as 60 related works in the archive. That's why Rosa Agua de Mar has 2 cabinets related to it. Other roses, like Queen Elizabeth or Eliseo Sierra roses, has less than a dozen related pieces. After many considerations, we decided to build 12 exhibition displays or cabinets where the visitors will find every single object associated to that one particular rose that Ortega and Solá were able to identify in their archive. So that's what we're seeing right now are the pictures of each one of the cabinets. The number 1 is rainwater, number 2 and 3 seawater, the number 4 is snow water, and number 5 is river water. That's a whole series of the water of the cycle roses. Then we have the number 6, which is the cabinet Antwerp, that includes 4 different roses. The number 7 is Rosa Canina. Number 8 is the sick rose, which is a key work in Roberto Bregon career, and that which is the work that Kaira was referring to when on his text, on the text that she read. Number 9 is the Rosa Morretes. Number 10 is the Soledad Lopez. Number 11, WDT, which is the initials of William Dissection Turner, so the painter William Turner. And lastly, the cabinet number 12, including 4 roses, the Thomas Richter Placito de Museo, Queen Elizabeth, and Eliseo Sierra rose. So, just give me a second. Okay. In addition to the works and documents shown in the cabinets, we decided to add some of the works from the archive and from the Carolina and Fernando Severi collection, which they keep apart. For example, we decided to include one of these series of Niagaras, the Niagara 3, the mural that we're seeing in the image, that is that Obregon used the Morrete rose to for the petals. We also include chronicles or chronicas like this one, which are related to the second poster proposal, which are made in relation to the Canina rose, which also has a cabinet in the exhibition. And we also included a series of masadas, in addition to the works that were related specifically to one rose in the archive. And the masadas are very important because they are related to the sick rose, to the Rosa Enferma. So and we are seeing here the cover of the book that we are about to publish with this whole experience of exhibiting the Obregon archive. So finally, what I wanted to say is this, that as curators of the exhibition, what we tried to do was to find a method of exhibiting Obregon's archive that replicated his own method, dissecting the exhibition, separating each element and regrouping them in a new totality. That is what we call accumulate, classify, preserve, display, that mirrors of both Obregon's own processes and strategies and curatorial and museum practices as well. Well, this is my brief account of some of the curatorial implications of the exhibition, and if you want, we can discuss it further at the end of my colleague's presentation. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Jesus, for that wonderful and detailed presentation going into the thinking and specificity, not only of the curatorial project, but also Obregon's artistic practice. So I'm delighted now to move on to our second panelist, Fernanda Pita, who is Senior Curator at the Pinacoteca de Estado de Sao Paulo and lecturer in the History of Art at FAPI Sao Paulo. Her research interests focus primarily on paradigms of national art in transnational and post-colonial contexts. She has been a FAPESP Master's and PhD Fellow. She's also received various other fellowships, some of which I will capture here, an AAMC International Curatorial Fellowship and a Foundation International Engagement Program Fellowship. She's also been a member of the Summer Collaborative Working Group at the Clark Art Institute, and I had the privilege of joining Fernanda at the Clark in that summer of 2017 as part of the working group. She's been a visiting scholar at the Fakultet for Kunst, Musik og Design in Norway, and also a recipient of a Getty Research Institute Library Grant. Her latest curatorial projects at the Pinacoteca have included Laercio Redondo Recast, which will be the subject of today's presentation, Artist's Work, Image and Self-Image, 1826 to 1929, and Adrián Juliá, Not Even the Dead Will Survive. So the title of Fernanda's talk this evening is Relaunching Histories, Laercio Redondo. So please join me in a warm Zoom welcome for Fernanda Pita. Welcome, Fernanda.
Thank you, Kyra, and thank you, Jesus, for introducing us to this fabulous exhibition that I regret not being able to see, but I'm really happy that I could grasp a bit of it with your presentation, and I hope we can discuss the many proximities and dialogues that we can have between Obregon's work and Laercio's work. And I thank all the participants and my co-panelists, Jennifer, Justin, and again, Jesus and Kyra for this introduction. Today, I'm gonna talk about a specific exhibition that I curated at Pinacoteca de São Paulo, which is the museum where I work as senior curator. It's the most old and one of the biggest art museums in Brazil and in Sao Paulo. And I'm gonna start sharing my screen. And in 2017, oops, no, it's not right. This is the first one. Sorry for that. Okay. And as I said, in the beginning of 2017, we started the process of rethinking how we would rehang the collection of the museum that spans, that is today of about 10,000 works, and that spans from the 17th century to the present. Sorry. And as an old and sometimes very conservative institution, we were very concerned looking into its many absences, not only the highlights or the masterpieces or the main narratives that we can tell with Pinacoteca's collection, the main narrative of Brazilian art, but we wanted to use that opportunity to think of what is lacking, what is missing, what is untold in this collection. So part of this process was facilitated by this fellowship that we were invited to have at the Clark Art Institute in 2017 as a group of scholars and with two invited artists, Laercio Redondo and Birger Lipsik, who joined us in this working group to help us rethink this rehanging, help us identify and elaborate on the counter narratives of Brazilian art that we would like to tell and show in this new presentation, and how we could, through this process, speak of forgotten, invisible, and often repressed histories of Brazil and Brazilian art. So Laércio's Redondo's practice, Laércio is an artist that is based in Sweden, but has this strong connection with his background in Brazil. And his work also often deals with Brazilian history, forgotten stories, forgotten characters and people who are part of this national identity and national narrative, but frequently are misunderstood or are not criticized in a way that his practice as an artist can address. So it was a very perfect match for us to be able to invite Laércio to be part of this process, to help us think through artistic practices, or how artistic practices could help us readdress or address some of the issues we were concerned with this hanging. So through this process of dialogues and discussion and research, because we were there enjoying this opportunity of having one of the biggest libraries of art history in the United States at our hands, and being able to think comparatively on how to rethink and rearrange national narratives of art in museums. We joined Laércio also in his interest in thinking through the strategies that are very common in his work of representing, reinstalling, revolving history through artistic practices and through artistic forms and movements, like in a way how he incorporates that in his practice. And one of the things that he was very interested at that time was to think about the role of smell, of scent, in reassessing memories. So this his research there was focused on the artist book collections that the Clark has. And at that library, he was able to find some artistic projects that dealt with smell and scent. And at that point, he began developing the project that he wanted to show at Pinacoteca. So we invited him, as part of this process, we invited him to do a project for Pinacoteca for a specific space that we have in our main facility, which we call the Octagon, where we present commissioned work by contemporary artists. So that was this combination of our interest in reviewing and rethinking the collection and Laércio's practice of showing and hiding, disrupting, de-identifying, denaturalizing, and reactivating stories that this intervention came to light. So his question was, as we developed that conversation, and that evolved to an invitation for him to develop this work at Pinacoteca. His question was, how would smell or scent act as a detonator of involuntary, repressed remembrance and memories? Of course, that connected and that reminded us of the very the very exciting discussions that Walter Benjamin has on involuntary memory, and how he, quoting and referring to Marcel Proust, talks about this very experience that Proust had writing his monumental work of smelling the smell of the little cookie, the Madeleine, that he puts inside the tea, and that the combination of the smell of the Madeleine and the tea explodes as a total new world of remembrance for his life. So that was something that Lercio was interested in trying to find a mode of operation through his work that would detonate this kind of experience. So the exhibition then involved to a series of strategies that Kaira Cabañas calls paralexical strategies, or paralexical operations that Lercio installed in the octagon, but not only in the octagon, throughout the whole exhibition of the previous permanent collection at Pinacoteca. So he decided to go for a strategy of hiding and showing, which is familiar to his practice, but adding the element of smell, of scent, as a third, experience, and a third strategy in his work. So he decided, he made this very brave and very courageous decision of emptying this very big space of the octagon and making the museogoer, the public, enter the space and be faced with this rectangle that would only appear in a certain, which image would only appear in a certain point of the space, which the person, the visitor, would have to be to look into that. This image is related to what is one of Lercio's detonators also for this show, for this project, which is the story of African-Brazilian painter, Estevão da Silva, which was the first Afro-Brazilian person to be trained in the academic Brazilian system of fine arts. And he, as history tells, he had this, developed this strategy of showing his paintings with a kind of display in its back with real fruits and flowers and tropical items that would smell very strongly and make those images more alive for the public. Whether this story is real or not, Lercio departs from this strategy to develop his own strategy in the museum. So you were always faced with something that was hidden, and then you have to engage actively to be able to see, to be able to experience. And in addition to that, he made a series of, I can come back to this slide after that. He made a series of displays throughout the exhibition, and some included what he understood as lacking or missing in the narrative that the museum presented. And together with that, he also displayed postcards with text related to each of those images. And at some point, he also intervenes directly in some of the paintings belonging to the collection with text and smell. So each of the paintings he addressed in his work belonging to the Pinacoteca's collection had this postcard, and when you open it, you could sense a smell, and that smell would detonate another perception, another understanding, another story that was not perceived, that was naturalized in a way of those works belonging to the collection. So issues of slavery, the presence of Afro-Brazilian figures and characters throughout history, the very obscure and non-observed elements of Brazilian modernity, which is also a topic that is very fun. Alessio is very fond of it. Were all those questions, all those issues were addressed by this operation, by this strategy that Alessio developed at Pinacoteca. And I can, so it departs, the work departs from the very understanding that Alessio has about images and how and the power of hiding and showing images and the ethics of images that is very very central to his practice. And when he encounters like a daguerreotype, and he, from the daguerreotype, this traditional historical obsolete image making process, that when you manipulate, you see or you don't see. From this very incident or small experience, he developed the whole strategy of the show, having a character like Estevão da Silva as his main proposer, his main detonator, as I said, and his strategy of scent as something that can activate episodic memories, that can speak to or can stimulate memories that are not in the rational level or in the voluntary level of remembrance, but are in a way behind or more direct connected with experiences. So I would like to quote what Akaira's essay, a little extract from Akaira's essay in the folder of the exhibition, that for me really summarizes this strategy developed by Alessio in this exhibition. And she says, his work's spectrality is born of a parallaxic relay between the silkscreen's shifting perceptibility. Those are silkscreens on wood, and this process he developed together with a printmaker from this very effect, this very kind of sensation that you have with the daguerreotype. And so as a monochrome, as a shimmering surface, as an image within an image, this kind of object, the silkscreen, as the museum goer's actual position in space. So it shifts the position of the museum goer in space. As I said, it makes the museum goer actively choose where to stay in front of those objects. Secondly, the aspect of smell and of scent of others. For me, it's very important that as part of his research, as an element that is not easily put into words. We actually don't have words for describing others. We use words that describe taste or that describe other senses to talk about others. But others can easily awaken hidden memories and revive emotions and repressed experiences, which is what exactly Laertia wanted to do with his show. So as just for closing my observations on this process, what I think is the most striking and strong aspect of Laertia's practice as a research artist is that he stimulates in his audience, in his public, those acts of interpretation that are not neutral, not passive, and not that cannot go without consequences. And so I close and I finish my my observations with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernanda, for your presentation. I wanted to, and I thought that, I mean, it was wonderful to revisit this project, which those of you in attendance now note that I was part of that project, and to kind of recapture the way that smell was really mobilized to kind of construct a different narrative of a very specific collection, and also Fernanda's role in bringing that project to fruition at Pinacoteca. So for those of you attending, I just wanted to let you all know that we'll be answering questions at the end. So please do keep sending your questions. And at the end, you know, I will pose one question to all of the speakers, and then I will go to the chat and capture some of the questions that have been coming in the course of the presentations. So with that, I would like to introduce our third panelist, Jennifer Jostin, who is Associate Professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Her research interests include the art and architecture of modern Mexico and Latin America, transatlantic and regional artist-based networks of the post-World War II era, and the presence of the pre-Columbian past and the indigenous present in modern and contemporary art. Her award-winning book, Matthias Garrett's Modernist Art and Architecture in Cold War Mexico, was published by Yale University Press in 2018 and examines the cultural and political transformations from the 1940s to the 1970s within and beyond Mexico through the lens of the Mexico-based German artist Matthias Garretz. She's collaborated on numerous exhibition projects and recently contributed surveys to the catalogs Art Latin America Against the Survey, as well as Pop America 1965 to 1975. So the title of Professor Jostin's talk this evening is Exhibiting Patrimony in Mexico, Mariana Castillo de Val. So please join me in giving a telepathic virtual welcome on this Zoom platform to Jennifer Jostin. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Kyra, for that kind introduction. Thank you very much to the Frost, particularly to Amy Galpin and to Carmen Carpio for making it possible for me to join in this wonderful panel today. And thanks so much to Jesus Fuenmayor and to Fernanda Pita, as well as Kyra Cabañas, for their contributions to this conversation on the artist as researcher in the Americas. I'm especially grateful to Kyra and to Jesus for the invitation to visit the University of Florida last January to see the remarkable Roberto Bregon archive exhibition and to participate in an earlier iteration of this dialogue about instances in which artists from across the Americas have acted as researchers, both creating and disseminating new knowledge through visual forms. As Carmen noted, my research centers on art and artists of Mexico in international contexts in the 20th and 21st centuries. The current book project focuses on how contemporary artists have engaged diverse ideas of Mexican patrimony or cultural heritage in the neoliberal era. My talk focuses today on one case study, the research-driven installations that contemporary artist Mariana Castillo de Bal has presented in Europe, Mexico, and most recently in the United States over the last 15 years, of which we're seeing 4 examples here, and all of which concern the history of how artifacts of the pre-conquest and colonial indigenous past have been displayed and disseminated. Castillo de Bal relies on her own research as well as her collaborations with researchers to address a question that she has framed as, to whom does the past belong? And that we might also frame as, is Mexico's historical indigenous knowledge the possession of the patriarchal state and its institutions? Castillo de Bal's installation-based practice is in dialogue with the efforts of other artists such as Marcel Brothers and Fred Wilson to mine the collections and particularly the museographical apparatuses of museums as a means of effecting critiques of the ideologies that these institutions and their conventions of display serve to reinforce. But her project can also be understood as evidence of a new paradigm within artistic practice, one that seeks to move beyond the role of the artist as researcher in order to engage researchers as artistic collaborators. I see this model as capable of going beyond critique to stimulate new, constructive, and collective approaches, not only to visualizing, but to producing knowledge in the Americas. As this panel demonstrates very clearly, the relationship between art and research is particularly relevant in the Americas, with its longstanding tradition of artistic research into the natural world, as Daniela Bleichmar and others have examined. Castillo de Bal's emphasis on museography is also particularly relevant to the art historical field of modern and contemporary art of Latin America, which has, since the 1980s, been driven by exhibition practice. Castillo de Bal was born in Mexico City in 1975 and studied printmaking there in the 1990s before carrying out postgraduate studies in Amsterdam in the early 2000s. She's been based in Berlin since that time. Each of the 4 exhibitions we see pictured emphasizes source materials from ancient Mesoamerica and New Spain. Jesse Lerner has compared Castillo de Bal's artistic practice to that of an archaeologist who unearths, scrutinizes, restores, and exhibits materials. She engages scholars of anthropology, art history, and mathematics, as well as model makers, graphic designers, and others who produce knowledge in visual and spatial forms, making these actual and imagined dialogues manifest in works that are rooted in technologies of reproduction and that draw on the science of what is known in Mexico as museografía, the techniques and practices of museums and of exhibition making. Particularly through her sculptural installations, Castillo de Bal explores conventions of display in order to present knowledge in new forms. In so doing, she sheds light on historical and ongoing power imbalances and on how the archaeological and artistic past has been and continues to be mobilized for modern geopolitical ends. In 2006, Castillo de Bal returned from Europe to Mexico City for Estas Ruinas que Ves, or These Ruins You See, her first solo exhibition in Mexico at the state-run Museo de Arte Carrillo Gil. The ruins that visitors saw were not actual historical vestiges of Mexico's ancient past. Rather, they were the remnants of apparatuses designed to display and disseminate the past in particular ways. Empty wood and glass vitrines mounted on elaborate iron legs, worn, bolted together fiberglass molds used to produce plaster or cement casts of pre-Columbian sculptures, old photographs depicting the transfer of monoliths from their sites of origin to the capital city, and a new series of monografias, these educational handouts common in Mexico to elaborate on elaborated on the non-linear connections that Castillo de Bal was making between the materials on view. I want to focus on these molds, which were made from Mexico's most famous pre-conquest carved stone monoliths, including an Olmec colossal head and the Aztec or Mexica Coatlicue, which was discovered in 1790 at one corner of Mexico City's main plaza, the Zócalo, and which occupies a privileged spot within the Sala Mexica, the central exhibition hall of Mexico's Museo Nacional de Antropología, the National Anthropology Museum. This basalt monolith, which was sculpted by unknown artists, visualizes and spatializes fundamental Aztec scientific, political, and cultural knowledge. It is a terrifying, towering representation of a decapitated female deity. The space where her head would have been is occupied by two serpent heads, each of which symbolizes a gushing current of blood. Within Aztec cosmology, the sculpture is an example of an Ixiptla, a term from Nahuatl, the indigenous language that continues to be spoken by 1.5 million people in the Americas today. David Carrasco translates Ixiptla as a god image, explaining that sculptures such as this, quote, were venerated because they were considered living divine beings. Castillo de Ball is particularly interested in the notion of Ixiptla, which, she writes, quote, takes its meaning from the particle sheep, meaning skin, coverage, shell. It is the container, the localizable epiphanic presence, the actualization of power infused into an object. A being here, removing the distinction between essence and material, original and copy, end of quote. Her broad interpretation of the concept raises the possibility of understanding this worn fiberglass mold, which she humbly displayed on its stomach, approximating how it was found buried, as itself an Ixiptla, an object charged with power. The cast of Coatlicue that Castillo de Ball exhibited in 2006 is one that remains in the collection of the family of fabricators who have long been charged with making official copies of Coatlicue and other sculptures that are considered masterworks of ancient Mesoamerican art for purposes including diplomatic exhibitions. Here we see one being assembled at MoMA at the Museum of Modern Art in New York in 1940. In 2010, Castillo de Ball commissioned a new greenish fiberglass cast, not of the sculpture, but of its mold. She's exhibited this work in different ways for different exhibition contexts, on its back, in pieces, upright, and at times titling it, "No Solid Form Can Contain You," a reference to the relationship between a deity and its Ixiptlas. In engaging with Coatlicue's indices and Ixiptlas, and in exhibiting the ruins of Mexican archaeological museography in the form of dusty fiberglass molds and antique display cases filled only with numbers corresponding to an invented audio guide, Castillo de Ball critiques practices surrounding patrimonio in Mexico. Anthropologist Sandra Rosenthal, who's one of Castillo de Ball's and my own interlocutors, reminds us that patrimonio, which is often translated as cultural property, heritage, or inheritance, relates, quote, to patria, or nation, and thus implies the Mexican state's political sovereignty over certain lands and their assets, as well as its citizens. Mexican patrimonio legislation regulates ancient artifacts and monuments, as well as other kinds of matter found in the subsoil, such as oil and minerals, as public property that cannot be owned by individual or collective bodies other than the Mexican state, end of quote. Mexico's modern political leaders have consistently used this law to justify expropriating archaeological remains from local contexts in order to exhibit them in federal institutions, asserting that these are, to again quote Rosenthal, quote, the tangible inheritance of all Mexicans. This expropriative practice is embodied in the imposing Museo Nacional de Anthropología, which was inaugurated in 1964 as a monument of monuments to memorialize the administration of President Adolfo López Mateos. Its architecture and displays are carefully engineered to assert a unified message of the continuous dominance of a centralized state rooted in Aztec Tenochtitlan, modern Mexico City, over culture and politics from the pre-contact era to the present. Given the Mexican state's ongoing commitment to that message and the expense involved in moving monoliths, the museum's permanent displays have barely changed over the course of 55 years. This monument of monuments thus does not reflect major archaeological discoveries and interpretations of recent decades. For these, viewers must visit regional museums and special exhibitions. While Castillo de Ball has critiqued the Mexican state's patrimonial logic by excavating and displaying its museographical ruins, contemporary artist Eduardo Abaroa has taken a more explosive approach. Faced with the impossibility of revising the National Museum's displays, collections, and architecture in ways that would honor the nation's disenfranchised indigenous peoples, he has worked with engineers to generate a proposal for systematically demolishing the building and all of its contents. Under the title of Destrucción Total del Museo Nacional de Antropología, Total Destruction of the National Anthropology Museum, Abaroa exhibits his plan in the form of diagrams, material demonstrations, and animations. Drawing on anarchist traditions, he thus engages seriously with the implications of proposals to undo structural inequality and patriarchal systems by imploding them. Needless to say, the Mexican state has not taken Abaroa's proposal under consideration. He poses it rhetorically, not as a threat, so much as an invitation to begin to grapple with alternative futures. I want to turn from Abaroa's destructive proposal to look at Castillo de Bal's recent exhibition, Intlili in Tlapali, Images of the New Land, Indigenous Identity After the Conquest, which was held at the Museo Amparo in Puebla, Mexico in 2018, and on which she collaborated with Diana Magaloni, an art historian and conservator who's currently a deputy director at LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. We see them together here, along with the new forms that Castillo de Bal produced, which made Magaloni's research tangible in real space and time. I propose that this project is evidence of an emergent phenomenon. Not only are artists engaging with and in scholarly research in order to drive the content of their artworks, but researchers are engaging with visual artists because contemporary art installations offer an unparalleled platform for experimentation and creative freedom, as well as a means of reaching different and potentially much broader audiences than may be the case in academic scholarship or historical museum displays. In this instance, the Amparo's director, Ramiro Martinez, was organizing an exhibition of Castillo de Bal's research-based site-specific installations and asked Magaloni to prepare a sideshow of 16th century documents and pigment analysis that could provide context for the contemporary work. Instead, Magaloni joined forces with Castillo de Bal to lobby Martinez for an exhibition that would be co-authored by them both from its inception. For this project, Castillo de Bal designed installations that channel the knowledge gleaned from Magaloni's 2014 book, The Colors of the New World, which is on the materials and techniques used to produce the Florentine Codex, an extraordinary compendium of Aztec life prior to and during the conquest, which was written and illustrated by indigenous Tlacuilos, scribes, in the mid to late 16th century. Castillo de Bal found a deep resonance within Magaloni's explanation that, quote, the purpose of the image in the Mesoamerican world corresponded with that of writing in the Western world, to record and build knowledge. In Nahuatl, she continued, the notion of recording history vis-a-vis subject paintings is expressed in the metaphor Intlili in Tlapali, literally the black ink, the colors, which refers to the outlines in the pigment or skin, a form of a xipla that combine to produce wisdom. Castillo de Bal's proposal was to make manifest the Florentine Codex's painting treatise in 3 modes, including a garden whose form is based on the frontispiece of the Codex Fejerver-Meyer, one of the only known surviving pre-conquest Mesoamerican painted books. Its components are the minerals, plants, and animal life, including cochineal bugs on nopal leaves, we see on the left, which were used to make pigments according to recipes described in Book 11 of the Florentine Codex. In another part of the museum, Castillo de Bal used pigments made by conservator Tatiana Falcon from the same recipes to create a composite mural of the process images from Book 11. Castillo de Bal has noted that in striving to copy the unknown artist's techniques and marks onto the walls, she internalized knowledge about their practices. Quote, in the moment of recreating colors, one understands the material in another way. It's another form of knowledge that's not based in typical textual sources, end of quote. Finally, for the museum's atrium, Castillo de Bal cast the 16th century pigments in massive cylinders and discs, describing these as, quote, a kind of science fiction, as if all of these colors had fallen from the sky, end of quote, which we could understand as an assertion that these processes and materials, these indigenous forms of making knowledge, are not only of the past, but of the present and the future. In this instance, co-authorship allowed both artist and art historian to delve far more deeply into the other's area of expertise than a more traditional research-based approach would have allowed. On one hand, Castillo de Bal's works are deeply informed by Magaloni's decades of scholarship. On the other, Castillo de Bal's agency as an artist whose site-specific projects are very much in demand by institutions made it possible for Magaloni to explore the extension of her research into real space and time in vast, prospective, and poetic modes. From these ruins you see to Intlili in Tlapali, we can trace a shift in Castillo de Ball's practice, from highlighting the void of patrimonio at the center of the museographical mechanisms through which the modern Mexican state has asserted its dominance over a heterogeneous population, to constructively asserting the continuing presence and relevance of historical modes that understand the production of art as the production of new worlds of knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that wonderful presentation. And it was also particularly wonderful to find resonances also with Fernanda Pita's work, with Laercio Redondo, in terms of not only artists engaging research, but researchers also engaging the visual arts as a platform. So I will take this opportunity to bring all of our panelists back on screen. We're waiting for you, Jesus. Welcome. And so I had one question before I go to the chat that I wanted to pose each of this evening's speakers, and you can respond to it in the most telegraphic way if that is what it calls for. I'm not calling for you to expound upon the response, but what I wanted to ask is, in the case of your research on these artists, if you could identify a moment when you developed a new insight in relation to the artist's work or to contemporary art more broadly. Or another way of saying this, I guess, would be that when engaging the work, the aesthetic experience, was there a moment in engaging the work that enabled you to understand or experience something you had not previously? And so this could be something intellectual, it could be discursive knowledge, it could be sensuous knowledge. But I think what I'm driving at is, like, can you recall a moment of intellectual pleasure in doing this research, the kind of response that I'm particularly invested in and would like to have that communicated in terms of our own enthusiasm as researchers when we engage artists' work. So Fernanda, I'll call on you since.
Thank you, Kyra. Thank you for bringing up the pleasure element of working with artists and discussing art, which we lack so much at this moment, where we're living in this direct, real contact with artworks, and of course with the colleagues that we share interest in common, and that we like to talk to and be together thinking about art. I'll try to be short in this answer, but I think two experiences working with Laercio were very important for me, like understanding his strategies as an artist researcher or researcher artist, and also like understanding the potential of the strategies he was developing. And one, I think, is the importance, the whole of display in his work, which I have to mention is done together with his partner, Birger Lipinski, which designed and developed all the displays in Laercio's intervention at Pinacoteca. So the specificity, the accuracy of that presentation, that concretization of the objects, and the very subtle interventions that Laercio does, they could not be presented without the accuracy and the sharpness of Birger's design sensibility. And secondly, the whole process of developing the sense for the exhibition, which involved, as I forgot to mention, that this exhibition was also a process, a collaborative process with writers, other art historians, and also with chemists, is that the word? Chemistry engineers who developed the sense for the exhibition, and they did it with some very subjective instructions made by Laercio and the whole team. And when they were able to grasp what was the experience that Laercio was trying to refer to, that was really awesome. Like a very incredible experience that they were able to connect with Laercio's experiences and to connect with the stories and narratives that he was addressing, and to develop this very immaterial element of scent and bringing it to the exhibition.
Thank you, Fernanda, for sharing that. I can only imagine the kind of almost, I'm not going to find the word, but what it means to then describe the difficulties already in describing smell, and then how to actually collaborate with the chemist in order to produce that work poses poetic challenges as well as practical challenges as well. Jesus, how about you? I'm going to mute.
I would say Roberto Bregon taught me how to disappear. He's, I think, working since we started working on this exhibition many years ago. I was trying to find a way of presenting the exhibition without creating or invading Obregon's language with my own language as a curator, which is very difficult because he was a declared enemy of curators and art critics, and he said once that I am my own curator. So he's that old-fashioned generation of artists that don't like the curators to collaborate with them. But I think that resistance is still teaching me a lot. Like that, to try to find a method that will replicate Obregon's work was so difficult, and that I think it was the wonder of doing this exhibition, like being able to map Roberto Bregon's work without being visible as a curator in the show. And I would like I would like to keep exploring that strategy as a curator.
Great. So the strategy of the challenge of being invisible as a curator, and the pleasure and displeasure that might produce. So a challenge nonetheless. Thank you, Jesus. So I will turn it over to Jennifer now to speak to her moment, or kind of in relation to Mariana Castillo de Val.
Thank you, Kyra, for this very thoughtful invitation and provocation to think in these terms, which for me gets to the heart of a moment. The first time that I visited and stood on one of the, I believe there are 3 floor maps that Castillo de Val has made as part of her practice, plywood sheets that have been incised on a monumental scale with designs of very significant maps of the terrain of central Mexico from the 16th century. And in 2014, I visited Vista de Ojos, one of these maps of a famous 16th century map that is now in Sweden, has long been in a library in Sweden. And as we often do in a gallery, I think we move through the anteroom, not paying so much attention to what was on view there, what was displayed there, into the main gallery. And the main space was this monumental floor of a black incised plywood floor on which I stood with my companions and experienced this map in a completely different way, at a completely different scale. It was only on going back out again that I took notice of what was on view in that anteroom, which demonstrated that each of these squares of the floor was itself used as a printing block by Castillo de Ball, that she had run each of the plywood sheets through a printing press to make both separate square panels, fragments of the floor, and also a bound book version. So since then, what I've come to find, and what's been very productive for me in engaging with her work, is to find the ways in which her own fundamental training in printmaking in Mexico in the 1990s is at the heart of her practice in so many ways, as it addresses reproducibility, mechanical reproducibility, and also reproductions and replicas by hand.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. So I'm going to open it to the questions in the chat. And so I encourage you 77 participants to put questions in the chat, and I will look at them. I do have a call out for Jennifer Jostin, and then I do have a couple of questions already lined up for Jesus. The call out is from Lynette Roth, who says, Jennifer Jostin's is a welcome call for greater transparency around the shared collective work, often already at the heart of museum exhibitions of contemporary art. So in terms of questions, I would like to begin with a question actually posed by one of Amy Galpin's students, because I'm always very aware as a professor myself that we likely have many FIU students in the audience, and I want to be sure to air their queries. So Andrea Rodriguez asks to Jesus, can you talk about Obregon's use of photography as part of his process? Do you think he saw photographs as artworks, or did he use it simply to document? And do you think this work would be the same had he chosen not to use this medium? So a question really about the status of photography within Obregon's practice. So thank you, Andrea, for posing a question.
It is a very interesting question and very complex. I'm going to try to respond to it. It has many different angles that need to be handled. One of the problems that I see that is implied in that question is that photography was since the 1960s one of the medium that conceptually artists like Obregon, an artist that were before Obregon, use as part of their work. So if you see, for example, Richer work or Ber and Hila Becker work, it's a photographic based work, but you don't see their work as isolated from the rest of the other artists that do photography. They are inside of a history of art that we study, including any medium. So it's something that comes with that generation of Obregon, maybe the generation before Obregon. Up until now, I would say that photography is one of the tools that artists use. In his case, I think it was very evident that he wanted to create a certain ambiguity in the status of the artwork, that he didn't want to create the value that a masterwork will have in his early work. His use of photography, I would say, was very similar to a documentary photography, and that idea of working in sequences, like in this photo that I showed during my presentation, that is a sequence of images of the decay of the rose, that is also a way of creating a discourse about the idea of circularity, which was very important for him. So it may be there was no other tool at hand for him to work with this idea of circularity at that time that he did this series of chronicles. He didn't consider himself a photographer. That was something that I want to say before Kyra said that I'm taking too long to respond to the question. He said that he wasn't, and that's why he abandoned photography too. So he first abandoned painting, even though he was a good painter. Then he abandoned photography, even though he did a very interesting work as a photographer, because he didn't feel, he felt the camera was like an obstacle for him.
Thank you, Jesus, for that extensive answer. We are being prompted by the Frost Museum administration to wrap things up, so I must communicate that. Though I did say in the chat that I was going to pose one rapid fire question, which means it's a 2-word answer, maybe 4 if there's middle and compound last names involved. But the woman in the photographs with the high heels in the exhibition, but which you did not show in your PowerPoint, Erica Corsano would like to know who this well-heeled woman in the photos is. So could you provide the identification of that individual in the photographs?
I think she's the naked woman is Judith. Judith is a friend of Roberto Bregon. She was Roberto Bregon, one of Roberto Bregon's collaborators for the Water as a Cycle series. So Judith is naked taking a bath in a river, because Judith was the one that Roberto Bregon commissioned to bring him water from a river to make a watercolor with river water. And that's the rose that we have in the show that is called River Water. It's called River Water because it was made, it was part of the project of making a watercolor of this rose with actual river water that Judy, the woman in the photo, brought to Obregon.
And presumably she's in high heels in another photo?
I don't remember that.
Okay. All right. So with that unknowingness, we will close. I would like to thank our panelists. So we know one of the identifications of one of the women in the photographs, and we'll have to do a little bit more archival research, follow up in the actual space of the exhibition on the search for the high-heeled woman as well. Many thanks to all of you. There are some thanks from the attendees coming through that I'd like to communicate to the panelists. Very many congratulations as well. And so just to close, I will hand it over to Chief Curator Amy Galpin at the Frost Museum for any closing remarks she might have. And again, thank our wonderful trio of panelists for their thoughtful presentations this evening, and their always careful, ethical, and rigorous engagement with contemporary art. So thanks to the three of you.
Thank you so much, Kyra. This was a wonderful program. I want to thank you and Jesus for organizing this program. Thank you, Jennifer and Fernanda, for your presentations. Please come and see our exhibition, Roberto Obregon's Archive. It is on view until May 16th. We are open to the public Wednesday through Saturday from 10 to 3. If you are able and willing, we would love to welcome you back to the Frost Art Museum. And if you're not ready yet for an in-person visit, we encourage you to go to frost.fiu.edu, where you can explore a virtual tour of the exhibition. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Have a great evening.